50 years. Um, so that hypocrisy has always been there. We've always known that that certain measures are used on allies and others against foes, and we've always seen that the U.S. is, willing to the Security Council, the permanent five members, that they essentially run it, in a self-interested, corrupt way that protects them and their allies. So, so yes, it puts a incredible stress on the international system if there's an order to cease hostilities and Israel simply does not, and the U.S. does not force it to. But I don't think anyone would be very surprised.
Thank you, Mike. And
I think, Mike. I mean, obviously, hypocrisy and double standards is the oldest reality of much of Western politics. I wouldn't say Eastern because they don't make the same claims, but I think what is elevated and expanded and heightened in terms of the exposure of these double standards and hypocrisy is that the US is simultaneously at the same time pursuing a genocide case, politically, publicly, through its means, obviously not at the necessarily at the International Court of Justice, but indirectly supporting that against Myanmar and against China. And the notion that either of those efforts won't be hurt by this is I think unrealistic. I think it does bring it into stark relief. And the other thing is, it's one thing to have double standards in variety of issues, but for many people, genocide is the gravest of all crimes, and so it elevates it to another level as well. So I don't know that there has been another genocide that the U.S. has armed, supported, defended, and protected. It is, I think, at another scale.
that's right, and that will bring that question back to the U.S. very, very soon. Like if the provisional measures are actually issued, like a ruling has issued by the ICJ in the next few weeks, and then South Africa brings that to the UN Security Council, the US will have to make a decision on whether or not they will veto a UN Security Council resolution to enforce the ICJ's ruling. And it will be like a watershed moment, a defining moment in US foreign policy history. Before I move to, of course, Adam wants to say something. I just wanted to give like a quick legal analysis of something very interesting that I've been following legally in the past few days, which is we're usually, when it comes to international law, we usually talk about the laws of war, and that's what Israel has been trying to claim in the past few weeks, in the past couple of days, that the laws of war apply to what's going on in Gaza. So international humanitarian law applies. They've spoken a lot about the right to go to war. So the like half of the laws, the use ad bellum, the right to go to war. They're saying we do have the right to go to war because of self-defense, etc. And then they talk about the conduct of their military operations in Gaza, which is the rules of war, or use in bello. So the two bodies of law that we're usually talking about, when the U.S. bombs Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, like we get so bogged down into these principles of distinction and proportionality. We say, oh, this bomb was illegal because the proportion of civilians to military objectives was off, or you have to distinguish between this and this. Now, what South Africa brings to the table with this genocide claim is that the legal argument here is that if there was indeed an intent for genocide, then you can't argue that you're committing genocide proportionally, and you can't argue that you're committing genocide with distinction. because you're committing genocide. So all the acts of violence that are committed by Israel are illegal under the convention. So it's actually like I've read some in-depth analysis about this in the past couple of days, and it's a very new area of conversations when it comes to Israeli actions. So we will see more of this, I think, at the ICJ in the upcoming weeks and months and years, where Israel will argue more that this is nothing more than just a conventional war. Like, this is just a war. And yes, we made mistakes. We dropped a 2,000 pound bomb instead of a 200-pound bomb. Oopsie, that was a mistake in our conduct, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable for that. But they're refusing to get into the other part of the conversation, where South Africa is saying, whether you use the 2,000 pound bomb, whether you use a laser guided 5-pound bomb that only kills one, you because of your intent to genocide, you have to cease your hostilities. So more on that later, I guess. But for now, Adam, I know you wanted to say something. I see a few folks also in the audience. Sam and
Yeah.
others. If folks want to talk, please raise your hand.
So just to answer the question that was put out in terms of timeline, the judges have indicated that they are going to take this up swiftly. And one date that's been put out there is that February 6th, apparently there is a turnover on the court of some of the judges. So that could be kind of a deadline of sorts, in that it's likely that the court would want to deliver its ruling on these hearings prior to that. Now, the court did also leave open the option that they might seek to hear additional presentation by the parties. So this may not be the only hearings. There might be additional ones, and it could be that a ruling could come quick, relatively, and not that February 6th is a fixed date in terms of a deadline, but it could happen very likely before that, and perhaps even much sooner. I just want to also, my colleagues have talked about the stakes of this for U.S. credibility, and I think that's fair. However, I think there's even something bigger at stake here, and I just want to offer this context, which is that I think the credibility of international law, full stop, and if not international law, then certainly international human rights law, full stop, is at stake here. And this is in large part due to the actions of definitely the United States, but other governments around the world, and some of the institutions themselves. And in this regard, I would say why this matters in some ways more than other types of cases, whether it's the Myanmar case or the Ukraine-Russia case or others, is that at the heart of the Palestinian question, at the heart of this conflict, at the very beginning, at the outset, was the failure to uphold international law. UN resolutions from the very beginning, from the very outset, even the resolution that established the state of Israel put conditions on that state that have gone by without other states, without the international system compelling Israeli action to abide by those conditions, including things like the right of return, and which were supposed to be make Israel's membership in the United Nations was meant to be conditional on its implementation of these UN resolutions. Further Security Council resolutions have been ignored repeatedly, never mind the vetoes that the United States has issued on behalf of Israel. And most recently, we've seen the International Criminal Court, largely on its own, because of course the United States doesn't even accept, for the most part, the ICC at this point. The actions of the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court with regards to the Palestine case have been, have advanced this idea that there's a separate system of justice, or lack entirely of a system of justice, when it comes to Israeli actions. And so this case, given that it's about the most heinous crime that there is, brought by a state that was liberated from apartheid and settler colonialism, and brought by people who themselves were from the population who were the most victimized by those systems, on behalf of another marginalized, victimized population with this history, I think really puts the entire system, international legal system, on the line here. And despite what might be the political interests of different countries to see how certain judges vote, I do think the judges are aware in this case, and if they aren't, it's upon all of us to make sure that this political cost is raised, that the entire credibility, as President Biden is fond of saying, the rules-based international order, he has also elevated the stakes of this case in a sense by invoking this mantra when it came to Ukraine. Well, it's not on Ukraine where the rules-based international order will live or die. It's actually in Palestine. And this is the one chance, really, I think, not necessarily for salvation, because we have a long way to go for that, but for there to be any meaning whatsoever going forward for international law.
Thank you, Adam. I don't know if other folks have any questions or comments. I see Summer is online. Summer, I haven't talked to you for a long time. It's really good to see you here. Sam Husseini, other folks, one call. If any of you would like to have like a small intervention about your analysis, what's going to happen next, please feel free to request or join us. Um, Sam, thank you for joining, and thank you for being on the forefront of this whole ICJ thing. I have to say, you're the first person in the world who told me that there is such a thing as a like a or application to the ICJ that is different than our initial requests for the ICC to interfere. So very very early on, like literally a few weeks after October 7th. So why don't you introduce yourself and give an overview of where we're at?
Thank you, Rod. Thank you very much, and thank you for all of the analysis so far. I've, yeah, I actually, just by way of background, initially wrote about this in 2014 during that Israeli assault. And when I heard, country after country call it genocide, and Francis Boyle and the late Michael Ratner both said, well, then you should invoke the Genocide Convention. And I wrote a piece about that then. So immediately after October 7th, I, dusted that off and started referring to it and, tried to do some writing and put out news releases and so on. So it's very, very gratifying to me that this did get did eventually happen a little later than I'd hoped, but very, very, very gratifying, and very gratifying that a lot of people pushed for it, and South Africa ultimately took it up. Um, I think we are at a tipping point. We could end up in a world of so-called realpolitik in which, it's horse trading, and we'll let you get away with your land grab, and we'll get away with our genocide. Um, or we could enter into a world where everybody is held to account and to, actual law. I always make a distinction between, rules-based order. I mean, rules are like, well, you can invoke that rule when you want to, and then you can invoke that rule when you want to. You want to invade Afghanistan? Okay, talk all about feminism and use that as a pretext. You want to invade Iraq? You talk about, disarmament, use that as a pretext. So I think we're really at a tipping point. And I think that's what we need to keep an eye out for going forward. That we want a system where all nations and all parties are genuinely subject to accountability for their actions. And there's one aspect of this whole thing that I thought South Africa's application was incredibly comprehensive, but there were some limitations of it, I feared. For example, they never got into the whole Hannibal Directive thing, so that Israel was able to portray itself as caring about its own citizens. Um, Additionally, the whole propaganda effort around it. Um, to me, the whole beheaded babies and all of the associated propaganda, to me, that's actually evidence of genocidal intent. That is, you put out these fake stories um, to say that, Hamas, beheaded 40 babies for the express purpose of getting away with slaughtering a lot of babies. So the propaganda is actually proof of the underlying criminality and the extent of it. So those are some of the things on my mind now.
Sam, I have one question for you because I know Steve War.
I wanted to just broaden the discussion beyond the United States, and I suspect that many of our listeners will have views on this. And that is the role, reaction, participation of Arab states. And particularly the stress this is putting or is not putting on states that are close to Israel and carry out security coordination and military coordination with Israel, by which I specifically include Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE, particularly pursuant to the UAE's Abraham Accords. Now, Jordan has directly, individually said that they support this case. And the Arab League recently stated that they support this case. I don't actually know what process went into that decision, if there was a vote, how the UAE voted, and so forth. But I think one other aspect of this case, and the war generally, is the extent to which it has put pressure on Arab governments from their own publics. Even in undemocratic countries, governments have to have a modicum of responsibility to their publics, to act and intervene and be seen as supporting the Palestinian people, and now at least collectively saying they support this case against Israel. But I really wonder what kind of further stress they might be if there's a decision that finds genocide or the risk of genocide on a government like the UAE, which has otherwise also said, I think Anwar Gadgash said last week or the week before, that they continue to stand by the Abraham Accords and will continue to further and deepen their relationship with Israel despite this. Um, so just throwing that out as an observation, and I'm going to pause because something's going on with my voice, and wondering whether any of our listeners or participants here have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, if we have any participants or listeners interested in weighing in on what Sarah Lee just raised, and just like a quick note, actually, one of the asks, one of the requests that Dawn has put out there is for third-party states to join the proceedings at the ICJ by filing what is referred to as a declaration of intervention that allows third parties to weigh in on their interpretation of the.
I am hearing silence, and I don't know if it's from my end or Rod. If you've got the mic, I think there's a glitch here on my end.
Can anyone else hear me?
I can hear you, Rod.
Okay.
Sam.
Maybe, I mean, can you please text Sarah Lee just to let her know that she's having a glitch on her mic? So I was saying, like, one of the asks that we have put out there was for other states to file declarations of intervention, and that allows these states to file what is maybe equivalent to an amicus brief in a U.S. context. So they're not parties to the complaint or application, but they can give their legal opinion, evidence, weigh in about the interpretation. So far, as Sarah Lee indicated, we haven't really had any of the usual suspects, the allies of Palestine, Arab Muslim countries have joined. A few, I would say 13 countries have expressed support to South Africa's application, but none have filed a declaration of intervention. We just learned today that there was indeed one declaration of intervention filed by Germany to defend Israel. So Germany has filed its first declaration of intervention to argue that Israel is not committing genocide under the convention. So hopefully in the next few weeks we will see other countries join in to make the arguments in support of South Africa as well. If any of our listeners live in other countries or have contacts with representatives of our other countries, we encourage them to visit our website, read our recommendations for how other countries can and should file for a declaration of intervention to join this. Sam, before we move on to other speakers, I'm not sure if Sam Hussein is still with us on the call. Yeah, he is. Sam, how has your analysis been about U.S. coverage of the ICJ so far? I saw a few, observations of, for example, the BBC not covering the South Africa proceedings on day one, but covering Israel's, you know, uh, hearing and presentation today. What has been your observations personally, or with the Institute for Public Accuracy? Like, what's the lay of the land in the media in the U.S.?
Well, I don't monitor media like I used to. I used to work at the Media Watch Group Fair, but just on my scant looking around, I mean, I couldn't even find it on C-SPAN, the South African coverage. And then today, several people were noting that BBC didn't cover the South African presentation, but did cover Israel's defense of of its genocide charges, and same thing of Sky TV as well. So yeah, and from my looking around, I saw scant coverage of it. I mean, there was some, but given the magnitude of this, given the general massive coverage that Israel gets, given the novel nature of it, given the critical importance of it, in a number of ways, far less coverage than one would think.
Any final comments from Adam, Mike, Omid, anyone else who is among our speakers? We'll be ending this Twitter Spaces in the next few minutes. But any final comments to add just the points that were raised by Sarah Lee or other final thoughts?
I would just maybe see, I think it's dangerous to try to predict anything out of this process, but I think one thing that strategically that the Israelis tried to do by raising the jurisdictional issues was to try to lay the groundwork for some of the judges to deny the South African requests for provisional measures on the jurisdictional grounds. And if that does happen, and if it does happen from, let's say, the United States judge, or the Israeli judge is there ad hoc, but does get to contribute an opinion and a vote. I still think that's an extremely damning position to be taking. And I think I haven't done as extensive research on this, but I think it would also be somewhat unprecedented. As the South African attorneys pointed out, the court in the previous cases of genocide that it has heard has issued provisional measures in each one. And so this would be setting an exception for Israel. And it doesn't seem that jurisdictional considerations of the kind that Israel is raising either were raised in other cases or were given much consideration by the judges. And so that's one place to look for, even if there is a majority opinion in favor of South Africa, is nonetheless a place to look for the further eroding and undermining of international law, of standards for all countries, etc., and how Israel and the United States might try to undermine the courts, any majority ruling by the court. And then further, I think it's also important to note, not only we can expect that if a resolution is brought in the Security Council, as you indicated, Rod, that the United States will veto there. That leaves South Africa with the option of going into the General Assembly under Uniting for Peace to introduce a mandatory resolution, a resolution that could have enforcement mechanisms. We did see a Uniting for Peace session of the UN brought by Egypt, but that had no enforcement mechanisms to anything that it was calling for, and a wasted opportunity and somewhat pointless effort by Egypt. And again, needing a two-thirds majority in the General Assembly, there'll be a real need and major effort for grassroots mobilizations to get countries and governments to support such a move if it comes to that.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you everyone who joined us today. We will keep this to 1 hour. The recording of this spaces will be available on our account. And we will definitely keep everyone posted in the upcoming weeks with similar initiatives on Twitter Spaces on our website. Please follow us on Twitter, on um, other social media platforms. Please subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting dawnmena.org and stay tuned. Thank you so much.